my first question when I came into BACE is the same question I have today. Why do women have so little to say about what happens to them?
20 patients were all lined up in a row in this big labor room, all flat on their backs, and they're all given routine injections of scopolamine and apomorphine. And then they went into the delivery room and had a spinal for the birth. Later on, waking up in the recovery room, some were very happy, said, "Oh, I didn't feel a thing, it was wonderful." Others said, "I missed out on something. This can't be the right thing."
My husband wanted to be with me when we had when we had them all, but it began when we had the first few, of course, and he was not allowed in. He was given my clothes in a paper bag and told they would call him.
I tried to get somebody to cooperate with me and do this with me, and he was one of the big Boston doctors, and he said he would cooperate, but he didn't. And as soon as he had a chance, he knocked me out completely, and I had one the old way.
I kind of thought I'd signed up for natural childbirth. Well, big surprise, no. I was just tied into the bed like everybody else, and got something, I'm not sure what, and I did say something afterwards, and he said, "Well, I only gave you 1/10 as many drugs as I usually give to people." And I said, "Well, how come the baby was born at 10:30 in the morning and I didn't wake up until 3 o'clock in the afternoon?" "Oh, well, he didn't bother to answer patients. Who cares what a mother wants?"
I had a monitrice, and she came into the hospital with me. I might not have had her as somebody else come, you know, I don't know, Justine, whether she was coming into hospital to coach, but that was key. This woman was going to keep that doctor's hands off of me.
So when I was having my first baby, first of all, I had to find a doctor, and I had to go back to the line and have a doctor there for the lack of anything better that I could find. But I asked my friend, Abigail Avery, if she could come with me. Abigail was 8 years older than I and had been to the Yale School of Nursing also, but she also had been to maternity center. When I read Dr. Grantley Digreed's book, I realized that he had the answer that I was looking for. He believed that childbirth was a natural, normal process of the human body, and for a woman, it should be a normal, happy experience. But now I had Grantley Digreed's principle statement in my head and found they worked with me, and so I thought I would help other people. Then I met Jean Whiffen, who is a physical therapist who came from England with her husband to study here. Her husband came to study, and she had worked with Helen Herdman, who had worked with Dr. Reed. And so she was teaching classes to patients of Dr. Galt, who was at the Lying Hospital. I met her and went to one of her classes. Then, Abby said to me, I saw in the paper that there's a group of women who want to get together and form a childbirth group, education group, such as they have in Seattle and Milwaukee. And here's the, I can't go, she said, but here's a notice. So I went, and there I met a group who had mostly been going to Mrs. Whiffen's classes. And so they said, okay, we'll get going right away. So they set up the group right away with president, vice president, chairman, and all the rest of it. And they said, well, we need a teacher, so why don't you?
And I called Maternity Center in New York. And I said, how do I get natural childbirth in Boston? They referred me to Justine. So I went to Justine, I went to her class, and I said, of course it's for me, there's no question.
For my classes, I only had the husbands come to the last class because I figured at that time, they didn't need to, they own everything. I didn't realize the importance at that time, but we soon got the husbands more involved and tried to get them to go to the hospital and be allowed in the hospital. It was a very gradual thing. People, if they had a good experience, they'd tell us, and then we recommend these doctors to other people. And then we tried to train the husbands so that they could go with their wives to stand up for them.
I learned about this group that were getting together about natural childbirth, and I joined in. That would be about 1951 to 2, and just started visiting them, going with a friend, and hearing what they had to say. I wasn't the terribly active type in teaching or taking classes or anything, but they got me to be secretary.
After that, I did begin to meet the other BACE people. Justine introduced me to some other people, and we began to have meetings around dining room tables. We began to hold public meetings. We began having local meetings, such as libraries, other places where people could learn about this. If they didn't want natural childbirth, they could learn about childbirth, which they didn't know. And a number of people did realize they would like to be part of this.
So the first meeting I ever went to meet the women in BACE, the meeting was being held at a classroom in Boston University, and two things were happening. Number one, on the floor, no less, being scuffed around by us as we got into our seats, were newsletters from the International Childbirth Education Association. I didn't even know there was an international group. And the fact that we were not alone, the fact that what was happening here in BACE in Boston was being mirrored by groups all across the country was terribly exciting to me.
The night that I went into labor, I was at a BACE meeting on rooming in. I had never heard of rooming in until that night. All of a sudden, I'm standing there talking to Mary, and I felt this incredible contraction. And I guess that, I didn't know for sure, but, it seemed like it was labor. And I had Nikki the next day, and then she did get to room in with me. So I have this incredible sense of how just by, the turn of fate, I had the kind of experience I had.
So the 60s and 70s, I was working in childbirth as a labor support, as teaching other couples, and going to doctors' offices, confronting them, saying I was looking for a place to refer couples in the class. And they would talk about fanatics, and they would talk about masochists, they would talk about just a fluke that it goes well, how dangerous childbirth is.
At that same time, there was a push on, of course, to get fathers into delivery at City Hospital. That took quite a while, but it did go through. The East Boston fathers were particularly involved in going into delivery and began bombarding the hospital and insisting on appointments with the chief of obstetrics and gynecology. And it was really great to see them become empowered to seek this out themselves. Later on, we had a program in conjunction with the Black United Front where we kind of besieged the hospital, I guess. 3 weeks after we started the program there, the hospital declared itself family-centered, and 6 months later, they admitted fathers.
But we didn't have a real vehicle to make a public splash. And we didn't know we were going to make a public splash. I simply invited Dr. Robert Bradley, who was then the author of the book called Husband Coach Childbirth, that had a film that was made in Calgary, Canada, if I recall, black and white, wonderful film of a natural birth with a woman very much awake and talking and the husband present. And the room was packed, and there were people lining the walls and filling the corridors, and the museum officials were deeply alarmed and distressed. They had no idea what was happening or why this was happening. And I don't know if they tried to stop the meeting, but they were very concerned, and we promised to be good. And it was one of the things that put BACE on the map.
Because I delivered in May, and in September I called BACE. And I called and said, I'd like to volunteer, I'd like to help out in whatever way I can. I didn't know very much about the organization at the time, and they said, well, we're having the first class for instructors. Are you interested? I thought, yeah, I'm interested. So I actually signed up for the first class that they gave and joined that class. And when I finished, I took over Mary's position because she was leaving Cambridge to go back to school. So I started teaching, and ultimately in the early 70s I was teaching anywhere from 3 to 4 classes a week because the demand was so intense.
And what we really were doing was raising consciousness, letting people know in the area, maybe who had never even thought of having their husbands in the birth with them, or who had never even thought that you could have a baby without a spinal. We were just letting them know that this is a perfectly reasonable thing for somebody to be interested in, and that it's a possibility.
I see that as one of the roles of BACE, is making women empowered to know that that is possible, and teaching them to stand up on their hind legs and demand it when it isn't given to them. One of the major effects of teaching BACE classes in a community setting as opposed to in a hospital setting always was that you would have couples from different OBs, different group practices, different hospitals. And without the instructor having to do anything at all, the couples would speak during the break in class and compare notes about what their doctor told them was normal and what the other doctor told them was normal. And it happened very frequently that as a result of the classes, and not with me pushing them, but with me giving them permission to change doctors, and or to tell their doctor that they heard this doctor would do such and such, wouldn't you do that too? And that was very, very productive for change.
The hospitals started offering childbirth classes. They, saw that there was money to be made, and they jumped on the bandwagon, started offering their own classes, and a lot of physicians were referring directly to the hospital classes, and our class enrollment really started to drop off. So we had a series of meetings, and what's working and what's not, and how can we capitalize on what's working to keep the organization alive and to grow and change. Someone said, we have these workshops, we have guest speakers, let's open them up to outside registration. And that's one of the things that we did, and that worked out pretty well. The original reason the council was founded was to provide breastfeeding support for people taking the BACE childbirth classes, but it always was a resource for the community. It just became more so. Now we have hospitals that give out the list, and it's primarily people who take childbirth classes in other settings than with BACE certified instructors who use the Nursing Mothers Council as a resource. But it's still there, and it's a great resource.
I became involved in Nursing Mothers Council. I was chairman of the Nursing Mothers Council, and I started a program in the health centers around Boston. There were at that time a network of 5 health centers teaching people in East Boston, Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, Dorchester, that whole area. And in those courses we taught people as young as 13. Probably the oldest was about 19. But we rarely had anybody older than that. They're all very young women.
Today the NMC program has a few different aspects. We train women who are going to take the IBCLC exam. And so they come to our fundamentals, and then they come to our advanced training, and they can become very well prepared to take the exam. We also do trainings for lay counselors, or women who want to become counselors, who may be nurses, may be childbirth educators. They can take our fundamentals, which is a intensive 32-hour training, and complete a homework and complete an exam and an application and become a counselor.
I really enjoyed being an NMC counselor, and I felt like it was something that I could do on a really personal level to support women after childbirth. And I don't know that there's one in particular that stands out, but there were so many times that I would get a call from a mom who was a week home from the hospital and was just having a hard time latching on, or was having problems with sore nipples, or didn't even know really what it was that they were having problems with, but just felt frustrated and overwhelmed. And the thing that made the biggest difference to them was to have somebody on the other end of the phone connecting with them and saying to them, these are the things that you're doing well. You've made this choice to breastfeed your baby. You're doing such a great job, and yes, it's overwhelming, and yes, it can be really challenging, and these are some things that you can do that are really simple to support yourself through the process, but what a great job you're doing.
It has stayed alive, all these years, because there's a thread of what people want, which is to hold on to something that should be a normal process, but we distract and get pulled all kinds of ways from it being a normal process. And BACE creates support for those of us who want to remember that it is.
And I think that the importance of what BACE certified educators do, which is to teach about the various options that are available in as unbiased a way as we can, so that people can leave our classes with the tools they need to make informed decisions for themselves, whatever those may be, because there's not a right or wrong way to do this. And I think that's another key thing that BACE teaches those of us who become teachers, that I think the work we do is as important now as it was 50 years ago.
I think the benefit of the core teaching skills session of the BACE training program has to do with the ability, having a safe place to integrate and collect all the information that the women have gathered through workshops, through going to births, through watching other people's classes, and take all that information and try to start then creating their own class. And using the principles of adult education as the basis for that. I don't think that you get that in any other program.
Because I've been teaching for 28 years, I'm into another generation, and every now and then I just finished a class last week, and the woman in the class was one of 4 children, and her parents came to my childbirth class for each of their 4 pregnancies. And it was just really nice to have her in there. It was kind of a good feeling. It makes you feel a little old, but it was kind of a nice feeling to know that young woman grew up with a mom who could tell her, and a dad who could tell her really nice birth stories, and that she grew up knowing that childbirth is a normal, natural event and something to look forward to in your life.
I do believe very strongly, and always have, that people should have what they want. The idea of teaching classes is to empower couples to have the kind of birth experience that they would like to have. It's not for them to have natural childbirth, because not everybody wants natural childbirth. But people who want it should be able to have it if they're well prepared.
I get so much back from being a part of BACE, that to be connected with this dynamic group of women who have a passion for birth and babies and families, and to be a part of that year after year makes me a better educator. It makes me, it keeps me connected to the birthing community, and I think that anybody, whether they've had a baby, or whether they want to be a childbirth educator, or they want to be a breastfeeding counselor, that a lot of times people kind of shy away from that if they don't have a medical background, if they're not a nurse or a doctor or a midwife. They feel that, as a lay person, would I really be a good childbirth educator without having that medical background? And they would be a great childbirth educator. And I think that a big part of our organization is made up of lay people who want to make a difference in the world. And here we are as a group 50 years later doing that.
I'm really hoping that this 50th birthday celebration will help the organization to move forward and, be here 50 years from now.